Before we start the shir, I'd like to wish my condolences to Stephen and Larry Hirschowitz, who are good friends of mine, as well as their brother, and Larry and Stephen's father, who I've known for many, many years. Obviously, their mother passed away, Carol Hirschowitz, and I just wish the family long life. And we're going to be doing this Gemara shir, which starts off with a Mishnah because the Hebrew letters of Mishnah and Neshama are shared. So it's often a tradition whereby when you're dedicating a shir to the Aliyah of a Neshama, that I hope this Mishnah is an Aliyah for Carol's Neshama, and that all many of the guys in the shir, even though they're living in Israel, do know the Hirschowitz family, and just long life. Okay, I'm going to start. Before we start the actual shir with the Mishnah, Kevin is going to share a short idea because we've got a lot to go through. Kevin, would you like to get started?
Purim approaching Thursday night, Friday. Wait a minute, sorry. I've got an idea here. So basically, the whole story of Purim highlights divine providence with Hashem guiding events despite hidden presence. And Esther, the word Esther comes from the name Hester Panim, which is hidden. So the word Esther, her whole role in the whole story of Purim is like a hidden miracle, which the Jews got saved after they were facing destruction, and there was a reversal of fate because it was a decree against the Jewish people. It was overturned, and Haman and who's the other guy? Haman and was executed on the gallows that he actually built. And what we need to do, it says it emphasizes the importance of Jewish identity and unity in times of crisis, which we are going through now. That couldn't be more apt. And gratitude, we need to try show gratitude that we were saved and the Jewish people are thriving. And we celebrate through the Suda and just happiness in in the month of Adar, which we're in now. So what brought to the last point, what brought about the salvation was praying and fasting, which can change a whole situation, change a decree. Okay, just wanted to mention that.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm just going to share the Mishnah. What is it? I heard somebody saying something. Okay, I'm just going to share the Mishnah a second. Okay. What am going to do is I'm going to zoom into it. It's just easier for those that are looking to read. So we in Makkos B52, and it says, although the procedure of Hazamah discredits the testimony of witnesses at any point in the judicial process, the Hazamah penalty is not imposed unless the court has already pronounced sentence based on their false testimony, but had not yet implemented the sentence. If, however, the Hazamah occurred before or after Hazamah was pronounced, or after it was implemented, the witnesses are discredited but cannot be punished. So because there are going to be other people viewing this YouTube share, just what we are talking about here is conspiring witnesses. And in Makkos, it states that whatever the conspiring or plotting witnesses wish to do to the defendant about accusing him of a crime he committed, and it's proved that by a second set of witnesses that the first set of witnesses could not have viewed the defendant committing the crime at that particular time and place, because the second set of witnesses said you were with us in a different location at the time you allegedly said you saw the crime. So the witnesses are discredited at any time the second set of witnesses testify that the first set had not been at that location. And we believe the second set from a tradition of Moshe at Har Sinai. So at that point of discreditation, the court case is dropped. But there is a time at which we punish the set of witnesses against the defendant who were plotting. And they are punished once the defendant has in fact been sentenced, but the verdict has not yet been carried out. So it could be a monetary case where they accuse the defendant of damaging or stealing money or not paying back a loan, at which what they intended to do to their victim is done to them. It could be a case where they're accusing the defendant of committing a negative commandment, and therefore he would be liable to lashes. But when they prove to be plotting witnesses, they are given the lashes they intended to do to their victim. If it's a capital case, then instead of the defendant getting the death penalty, the Eidim Zomimim, the plotting witnesses, get the death penalty. So I'm sure that just puts everybody a little bit up to date. So Zomimim witnesses. So when we read the word Zomimim refers to plotting witnesses. Now, if it's a case of contradictory testimony, where they are saying different facts of the case compared to the second set of witnesses, they don't get a reciprocal punishment. There is a ninth commandment saying, thou shalt not bear false witness, at which, according to some opinions, does get a negative commandment punishment of lashes. But many say because it's speech and action orientated, they don't always get that. So those are testimony where contradicting witnesses are found to have been contradicted in terms of the manner of the case by the second set. The reason why we generally don't apply punishment is because we don't know in that case if we believe the second set of witnesses or the first set of witnesses, because they're contradicting each other. But they're contradicting each other regarding the facts of the case as opposed to the integrity of the conspiring witnesses, of which the second set have claimed the first set were with them in a different province at the time the crime took place, and therefore the integrity is put into question of the first set, and that's why they get the reciprocal punishment, not for contradictory testimony. We did say that sometimes people lie, but they're not lying about actually witnessing the event. They actually might be caught in a position where we said the person that's one of the witnesses was at 3 o'clock in the morning at the Hilton Hotel having an affair with his secretary, so he's going to cover himself well, because the last thing he needs is a divorce where he loses half his assets and having a affair. So he's not going to exactly say he was at the Hilton Hotel, because he's going to be caught with possibility of not only losing custody of his children, but a huge alimony settlement. So there are reasons people lie, but it doesn't mean in that case that they are against the defendant. They've just got no punitive intent. It's merely that they don't want to get into trouble. So the Gemara does differentiate between the different cases. Let's go on with the Mishnah. Plotting witnesses, conspiring witnesses, which are known as zomimim, are not executed as punishment for testifying falsely that someone was liable to execution unless the verdict has been delivered before they were discredited. So we are saying if at any time before the defendant is basically has a verdict against him for a death penalty case, at any point when the second set of witnesses discredit the first set, the case is merely thrown out of court. If, as we're going to learn, the defendant has already been killed and the second set of witnesses only come afterwards and say it's impossible that the first set viewed the defendant doing the crime because they were with us in a different location, the Eidim Zomimim do not get the reciprocal punishment. because the victim has already been killed. We're going to discuss as to why, because it doesn't quite make logical sense, and that's why we have to delve deeper in the matter. So before offering the scriptural source for the above law, the Mishnah digresses to a related matter. So what are we going to discuss in summary? Is that, sorry, apologies, guys. Let me just bring up the Gemara here. Is that basically we are, let me put it like this. The Mishnah prefaces its derivation of this law with a description of a debate between the sages, which are the Pharisees, and the Sadducees on a related subject, because the sages' conclusions in that regard provide the grounds for the inference upon which the Mishnah's law is based. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bit of history here. Is that before the Common Era, or as I like to call it, before the Common Era, because unfortunately from JC is when the secular world constitutes that we've had about 2025 years. So who are the Sadducees? They basically were a heretical sect in the Mishnaic era, and their beginnings are traced to Tzadok. So Tzadok is a disciple of Antigonus of Socho. He was actually a Jew that had a Greek name, and he adhered to Hellenistic principles. And Tzadok was even more Hellenistic in his approach. And this occurred about 260 to 10 years before the Common Era. So it was a period of about 50 years at which Tzadok was involved. Okay? And Tzadok denied the divine origin of the oral tradition. So he didn't believe in the Gemara, the Talmud, the Mishnah, etc. And he refused to accept the interpretation of the written Torah as handed down by the sages. So it wasn't just the oral Torah, it was the written Torah. He had a different interpretation. So if you want to know how powerful the Sadducees were, they actually wielded considerable power during the last 2 centuries of the Second Temple era. And also for a while during the year of the Hasmonean king Alexander, who was known as Alexander the Great, Yanai. Now, Yanai was around the Hasmonean king about 103 years to 76 years before the Common Era. So basically, the Hasmonean king ruled for about 27 years. And the problem was the Sanhedrin consisted purely of Sadducees at that time. In other words, people that denied the oral Torah. And it states it both in historical recollections and history books, as well as mentioning it in Kedushin 66a. So we were at a crisis point because this occurred for quite a period of time. So Hashem made a miracle, thank God, and there was a gentleman known as Shimon ben Shatach, or Shetach, as Kevin said. There are different pronunciations, he's correct. And basically, this had to come to a head because the Jewish people didn't want to adhere to the Sadducean judges. And many did, because it was obviously more lax. They never had to adhere to any of the oral Torah. So this debate between the Sadducees and the Pharisees occurred because Shimon ben Shatach had a series of debates in which he demonstrated the untenability of the Sadducean positions and the strength of the sages' tradition. So eventually he got rid of this particular process. So why are we mentioning it? Well, for a very simple reason, is that there were certain halachic conclusions that came through differently. So the Sadducees say, they obviously the Sadducees, as we said, did not believe in the oral Torah, and they had a different version of the written Torah, and they say that conspiring witnesses are not following the Mishnah, that Zomamim witnesses, conspiring witnesses, are not executed unless the accused has in fact been executed as a result of their testimony. So what they're saying is that, look, there might have been a verdict against the defendant for getting the death penalty, but if the defendant hasn't been killed because their plot was revealed by a second set of witnesses testifying the first set were with them in a different location, we don't execute the conspiring witnesses. It's only in the event that you can't circumvent this process and the defendant is killed, at which case the second set were a little too late, but they said the first set couldn't have seen what they thought they had seen because they were with them at a different location. So these were clearly plotting witnesses. So according to the Sadducees, we only punish conspiring witnesses if their plot had been successful. And what is their evidence for this? It's in Devarim chapter 19, verse 21, Deuteronomy, and it uses the place of life in the place of a life. So why does it use this pasuk in Deuteronomy 19, chapter 19, verse 21? Because the entire pasuk of Edom Zomamim, you shall do to them what they plotted to do to his brother, or as he planned to do to his brother. That's actually in chapter 19, verse 19, not 21. But because thematically this issue comes up afterwards and uses a term, nefesh, tachat nefesh, a laugh in the place of a laugh, what it is actually implying, according to the Sadducean position, is that the hazama penalty is reserved for a case in which a life has actually been taken because of them. And the rabbis don't hold by this because they say that they say to the Sadducees that had another verse not already been stated, and you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother. What does that mean? It basically means if you want to plot to have somebody killed, no one plots to kill a dead person. The person's dead. So this is proving that at the point that their plot took place, that fellow Jew defendant was still alive. And therefore, it was only at that point where you plotted to do against your brother, but you weren't successful, can the reciprocal penalty of a life for a life actually be implemented. Okay? So he has to still be alive, and sentencing cannot be carried out at that point. Once it's carried out, it's too late. Okay? So having produced biblical proof of their position, the rabbis, who were the Pharisees, refuted the proof adduced by the Sadducees. So if you follow in the Mishnah, the question arises, if so, that the punishment can be administered only if a verdict has not been carried out. Why does the verse say a life in the place of a life? Because what is the implication? Is that the accused's life has actually been taken, because it might have been thought that from the time their testimony is accepted by the court, and even before a verdict is handed down, the witnesses are subject to be executed, because at that point it could already be said that they plan to harm the accused. So the Torah is very specific. Up until when the verdict is handed down, even though they plotted to have a life taken, at that point there was no verdict against the defendant, so they couldn't trigger the pasuk, a life in place of a life. So it teaches that they are not executed unless a verdict has been delivered. But if a verdict has been delivered already, and the defendant has been killed, you can't plot against a person that's already dead. So at that point, they don't get the reciprocal punishment. So it's a short window period between the verdict and sentencing. Now, I just want to bring something to you in terms of some of the finer points. Is that what we said yesterday is there are different places this appears. You've got a life in the place of a life in Shmot, which is Exodus chapter 21, verse 23. But that's in the context of a passage dealing with bodily assault and murder. It has nothing to do with reciprocal penalty. So that's why many use in this section a laugh for a laugh, which is actually another way to view it in Devarim chapter 19, verse 21, because it has to be specifically honed in on this punishment for a reciprocal punishment for false testimony to get the accused killed. So we don't use that pasuk in chapter 21, verse 23 of Exodus. That's for direct murder and bodily assault. We use this issue of where it follows on for, and what and basically it says, and you shall do to him as he planned to do with to his brother. And then it says a laugh for a laugh, or a laugh in place of a laugh. So we have to be more specific, and that's why this argument takes place. But we just want to explain to you that once a guilty verdict has been delivered against the accused, it can be said, guys, at least in a nominal way, that a life has been taken. Basically, in Torah law, there's no separate sentencing procedure. Rather, actually, the verdict includes the sentence. So in a capital case, the guilty verdict is accompanied by the death sentence. Okay? So in a legal sense, from the moment a death sentence is pronounced, the condemned is legally considered a dead person. And therefore, once the accused has been sentenced, the Zomimim can be considered to have taken a life in the legal sense, and their punishment can be termed a life for a life. But once that life has been taken, if the plot has only been foiled after the case, then because the pasuk states, you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother, he actually you cannot punish them because they can't plot to kill a dead person that's already dead. So that's one of the things that you need to bear in mind. Okay, now why are we saying this? We're saying this for a specific reason. Is that in secular law, a verdict may be passed, but the sentence depends on various factors. It depends on for example, if somebody's been sentenced to death, it depends in which state they were sentenced to death in America. There's different types of execution. It depends if he's on death row and he can get an appeal by the governor of that particular state. So the halachic law is not to traumatize somebody on death row where they wait years or decades to see if they're going to get off the hook. That trauma of awaiting execution is far more than a quick death. Then also there's that other aspect, that there's a kapora atonement aspect, that if you embrace the teshuvah process, you've got an opportunity, if that opportunity is taken, to use the death sentence that's put against a murderer or against somebody that tries to have somebody killed as a way to atone for their sins, so they don't have to pay with the full extent of the law in the next world. So there is an atonement aspect. We also said that in many sentencings in America, the actual punishment would depend is it a felony? Is it a felony, interstate felony? Is it habitual? In other words, is this a third time strikeout? Is this person got violent behavior? Can they be trusted with parole? First time offense, etc., etc. There's a myriad of factors. Where can we see this in the death sentence? Well, if a man comes home and finds his wife having sex with his best friend in adultery, he might lose his mind and decide to ventilate his best friend and his wife with his revolver. And the court says, he had a spirit of madness. He couldn't cope with what he saw, and therefore they're more lenient with the death sentence. If a man had an affair with another man's wife and plotted to have her take out an insurance policy on the husband's life, and they were going to run off to Barbados together, the one is premeditated, calculating, in a very cold way to get rid of the husband, who legally and morally should be with his wife, and he basically is the adulterer and was quite callous in wanting to inherit millions of dollars with her and leaving this poor husband dead. In the other case, it was the husband that came home, saw his best friend and his wife having adultery, and in the spirit of madness lost his mind and killed the his wife and his best friend. Now, a secular court would see that as having two different levels of intent, and the sentence might be more lenient in the case of the husband that comes home to find such a awful affair. In halachic purview, each verdict, each sentence that has a verdict is carried out because it's preset by the Torah without these extenuating circumstances. Not that the Torah isn't in depth, but we're living in a society today where people don't take certain things seriously. Like in the Talmudic times, nobody would dream of using Hashem's name in vain, and they would be very reticent to take an oath with Hashem's name and would rather pay money that they owe if they were in the wrong. Today, we're living in a shocking society at which people would commit perjury and do all sorts of things that they wouldn't have done years ago. So that's the premise upon which this was built. Now, there is a question that's asked that I'm actually going to discuss a little bit out of the Gemara, but just bring a particular fact. Okay. So the Gemara is bringing this case of what is considered the Sadducean position and what is considered the Pharisee position. Now, we don't hold by this, the Sadducees because they didn't accept the oral Torah and the written Torah in its present form. But the argument logically would seem to support the Sadducean position, even though it's not how we hold today, by virtue of pure logic. So what's the Sadducean position? And I'm going to go through it obviously in the Gemara itself, but I just want to give you a basic premise because it ends in 10 minutes. We'll start the Gemara tomorrow. It's the Sadducees say that if you intended as plotting witnesses to use your testimony to get an innocent person killed, and you were not at that particular location at the time where you accused the defendant of committing the crime, and on that basis, when you were called out by a second group of witnesses and saying it's impossible, you viewed the murder on basically Sunday the 9th of March at 9 a.m. at Sandton City because you were with us at that same time in Durban, then clearly they were known as plotters because they couldn't have seen such an event. And in that case, when you attempted to have the defendant killed on conspiring testimony, if by the reciprocal punishment the defendant was already given the verdict, but they hadn't carried out the sentence by the time the second witnesses came, and this only came to light in between the verdict and the carrying out of the sentence, in that particular case, the Adam Zomim and the conspiring witnesses are eligible to get the reciprocal punishment. So what the Sadducean position is, if in an attempt to have a defendant innocently killed, a mere attempt, and they were caught out, they get the death penalty. Surely, when this defendant is actually killed and the second set of witnesses come to light and say the first set of witnesses couldn't have viewed such a crime because they were with us in a different location, even more so, the conspiring witnesses should get the death penalty, because in the first case, the defendant hasn't been killed yet. They had a verdict against him, and legally he was considered dead man walking. But in fact, he hadn't lost his life yet. So in a case where he hadn't even lost his life, and we apply the reciprocal penalty based on intent of what they intended to do to the defendant, how much more so when the defendant actually loses his life, should the reciprocal penalty be applied to the defendants? Okay? And our particular Mishnah is saying, no, that can't be the case, because when you look at the position, it's not tenable, because the Mishnah says in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, is, and you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother. So if the sentence had already been carried out, the rabbis say, then they couldn't have had, it wasn't the timeline where they plotted against their brother, because you can't plot to have somebody killed that's already killed. And at that time, we don't apply the reciprocal penalty. Okay? Just so you know. Whereas according to the Sadducean position, if an attempt to do something got the conspiring witnesses killed, surely when you're successful and an innocent person dies, they should actually be given the reciprocal death penalty. But the difference, and that's known as a kal v'chomer, in a case where the defendant wasn't even killed, they get what they intended to do. Surely in a case where the defendant is killed, even more so, the plotting witnesses should get killed. But that in Latin is an il fitorial, sorry, it's a tongue twister, il fiatori argument, which means a case of stringency. If a case of stringency is applied to a lenient case, even more so when the case is more stringent, you apply it. Okay, but it doesn't work according to halachic parameters for two reasons. Is that a logical conclusion is not how we meet our punishments where there is a spiritual ramification, because there are two schools of thought here. The one school, according to Tosfot, is basically saying that Hashem basically oversees all cases with the Sanhedrin, and if this defendant was killed, he wasn't innocent. In some Gilgul, in some incarnation, or in this incarnation, he did a forbidden act that was worthy of the death sentence, and the fact that Hashem let it get to that point meant this person was meant to be killed by the Sanhedrin because they got away with it at some point in their soul's history. And therefore, at that particular point, it was meant to come out. Will the Adim Zomimim conspiring witnesses get punished? Absolutely. They'll get punished worse in the next world, because what actually ends up happening is that the attempt to have somebody killed and corrupting the ends of justice gets a death sentence. Then when you actually kill somebody because of your testimony, that is not seen as the same spiritual crime. That's seen as far more heinous. And therefore, it's too good for the plotting witnesses to suffer in this world with a death sentence, because Hashem does not want to provide a kapora atonement for them in this world. Their souls will have the full brunt of punishment in the next world. So the atonement and losing their life in this world by corrupting the justice system and putting an innocent person to death is not an opportunity that they'll get in this world, and therefore they'll get the full spiritual punishment in the next world. So what the rabbis are saying is we cannot learn spiritual principles from logical inference alone. In order to make il fortiori argument in Latin, you can use logic alone, but in order for halachic principles to take place, you have to have the logical argument coupled with scriptural evidence that are supported by the Tanoim and from Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. So therefore, you cannot apply any sort of penalty of even more so without a scriptural derivative. But however, a kal v'chomer can be used to refute a punishment. So what I mean by refuting a punishment, if you're going to punish somebody and you one of the Tanaim can use a kal v'chomer to say get the person off the hook and give them a leniency, we do take that logical inference, even if it's without scriptural sourcing, to have more mercy. So logical arguments on their own do carry weight, but certainly they are not indicative of enforcement, but merely up for consideration, especially in the case of judging mercifully, but certainly not in the case of adding added punishment or stringency. As far as a dayu is concerned, a dayu is there to constrain a kal v'chomer. What does that mean? is that if in a lenient case you give a strict punishment, in a more stringent case you should get even more of a stricter punishment. But the Dayus states that you can only apply the level of stringency in the source case to the target case, meaning if in a lenient case there's a strict punishment, in a more stringent case, that same strict punishment can be applied if there's scriptural versing and logical inference, but not stricter just because it's gone from lenient to strict. You can apply the same strict punishment, but certainly not stricter. Okay? Guys, I think we finished for the day. We'll go through the Gemara tomorrow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that cleared it up quite a bit. Thanks.
All right, guys. Have a good day further. Be well.
Cheers. Thanks, Damon.
Sure.